Okay, we are now a few minutes past 4 here in Central European time, so we're going to dive right into it. Thank you all for being here today. Let me start rather by quickly introducing the speakers for today, which is myself and my colleague Maarten. We are both the co-founders of ClauseBase. For those of you who don't know Maarten, Maarten is part of that rare breed of hybrid lawyer slash developer. He first started experimenting with software development at the age of 7, continued to hone his skills throughout his teens, throughout university, did not in fact study computer science, but law, and worked as a freelance software developer for a few years before joining international law firm DLA Piper to start his career as a lawyer, which after a few years also took him in-house before finally going on to found ClauseBase in 2018. I myself am also a lawyer by background. I also joined DLA Piper as the first step in my legal career. Worked for a little while in IT contracting, but gradually specialized more and more in data protection law. Until in 2018, I joined Maarten to co-found ClauseBase. And basically, we've been servicing legal teams, be it law firms or legal departments everywhere, with a suite of different legal drafting tools ever since. But enough about us. Before we officially kick things off, I just wanted to say that you are welcome to share any questions you may have in the Q&A menu of this presentation. We'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Regardless, this webinar is being recorded, so if we do go over time a little bit and you have a hard stop, just know that we will be sharing the recording in the course of tomorrow. So without further ado, Maarten, take it away.
Yep, thank you. So I'll take control of the slides. So setting the scene, you all know, you've all heard about GPT, you've heard about large language models, LLMs, as I will call them for the rest of this presentation. At the outset, let's be clear, AI is actually not that great. Let's admit it, everybody who's ever driven a Tesla knows it. Half of the time you like the AI, half of the time you kind of hate it with all the unnecessary warnings that you get. On the slide, you see actually a funny example of Volvo, the car manufacturer, who actually trained its artificial intelligence in Scandinavia, and was then surprised that its cars didn't really know how to react against jumping kangaroos. So that's one of the examples why artificial intelligence is actually pretty brittle. It really doesn't reason like human beings. It has a completely different way of thinking. It extracts millions of weird rules for itself, which it then starts to apply to new knowledge. But even small variations can then cause completely different outcomes, as you can see on the example in the slide, where it thought it was a panda, but you add a little bit, tiny little bit of noise to it, and then suddenly it becomes a completely different animal in the eyes of the artificial intelligence. It's a black box. That's one of the other disadvantages of artificial intelligence. Human beings really can't know what all these millions, if not billions, of rules that the artificial intelligence internalized, what they actually are. And they are also really difficult to update. It's quite impossible to hold artificial intelligence accountable. There is some research being done into explainable AI legislation, especially here in Europe, is trying to do something that this is pretty immature still at this moment. So yeah, it's certainly not perfect. There are some other issues as well. For example, there's simply not enough data to feed AI. You require thousands, if not millions, of examples of the stuff that you want to subject to the AI. But very few companies can actually deliver hundreds of examples, let alone the millions that are often required. Another issue, data scientists, it's very easy to talk about artificial intelligence, but you do need people to drive these software engines, and they are very hard to find and extremely well paid. And especially in the legal area, there are not so many people working on this. Then there's the thing that artificial intelligence is completely overhyped. In the legal tech sector, there's only a handful of products that do real AI. But if you inspect a typical product brochure, you will see you will get the impression that actually everybody's doing it, which is completely not the case. And then finally, let's not forget that AI has a huge carbon footprint. It a factor 1,000 more than traditional databases or other typical IT stuff has. So really bad environmental impact. So actually the consensus is, except if you're a paralegal, don't worry, AI will not take your job. I can assure you about this. You will not easily see robots in court. You will not see software that take your place instead of you talking to clients. And the legal strategy is such an important part of the job. Forget about AI doing this in your place. But that was actually the message that I used to say up to a few months ago. Most of the stuff that I just talked about still stands for most of the artificial intelligence technologies, but not for those large language models such as GPT-4. You've probably heard this on the news, there was this report from Goldman Sachs, which actually estimates that a lot of legal tasks can be automated by these large language models. So should we be worried? Yeah, kind of. What changed? What really changed? That's the question. Well, LLMs are a game changer, that's for sure. But the reason why the old artificial intelligence, all the stuff that came before GPT-4 or GPT-3, the reason why that technology didn't really have an impact on the legal profession, the reason for this is as follows. So we all know law is a profession of words. We know it's about clever wording, talking, writing, and so on. We also know that dealing with language is very hard for software, and especially for some other languages besides English, this is really a hard problem to tackle. And researchers have been trying this since the 60s with not so great results. And that's also the reason why most of the legal technology products have so far shied away from doing real core language stuff, because it's so hard. They tried, or maybe they didn't try it, or the results were quite poor or full of noise. And then there was GPT-3 that came on the horizon about 1 year and a half ago, and that was quite promising. The signal noise ratio of GPT-3 was something like 6 out of 10. It kind of worked, 6 out of 10 times, still bad 4 out of 10 times. Bad enough for critical lawyers to probably ignore the technology for the time being. And then there was GPT-4 a few months ago. Suddenly, the signal noise ratio went up from 6 on 10 to 8 out of 10. Not perfect, but really, really good. Better than your average co-worker when it comes to language stuff. That's something, if you've worked with this new tool, if you've been so lucky to get access to it, then you know that it is really, really good with words. And that's the game changer. It's all about processing languages. Nobody saw this coming. There was this in the news, the guy from Google who went to retire and actually suddenly started warning about all the dangers that he's now seeing in the technology that he has co-developed. There was OpenAI itself, the company behind GPT-4, who was unaware that one of the technologies that it was experimenting with would become so great because they were actually interested in something completely different at the beginning of their journey. People from Google didn't know, they were actually responsible for some of the core technologies behind GPT-4, and they now kind of regret that they published all of this in the open, and that another company took it and did great things with it. Google is now kind of reconsidering its position, how to deal with all its research, but also Google knows right now that something needs to be done here, and there are some leakages within Google warning about a lot of stuff. There has been this letter in the news about all the dangers that come with artificial intelligence, that we as a society don't yet know how to handle this. And then there's Facebook, who you know was completely into the metaverse up to a few months ago, and is now quietly reconsidering its position because, you know, metaverse didn't really take off, while artificial intelligence is taking the world by storm. So how do they actually work? The large language models, you should kind of see them as a little bit like our brains. They are trained to learn associations between billions of words. They remember them a little bit like our brains, not in a very organized way, but you know, with billions of neurons being fired when you think about something. So if you ask an LLM to produce something, it will look into all those associations and try to figure out something, to recollect how what word effects, what do I need to say, and to generate something. So it creates something from scratch every time you ask for it. So how are they actually trained? Well, during training, which by the way takes months using thousands of computers linked together, and it costs millions of euros. So, you know, small companies can't easily do this. Forget about doing this in your garden. But, you know, big companies like Microsoft and Google can do this. So they actually train the large language model by playing billions of guessing games, where it tries to guess the next word, the most likely word given the context. So in a contract, for example, it will start to guess, like, what would be the next word for any damages caused by, let's go for errors, or, you know, next time let's try again and again and again. And so it will kind of guess against itself. It will split itself in half, and one part of the LLM will give the task, and the other part of the LLM will try to predict it. If it's good, it learns. If it's wrong, it tries again and again and again, and it becomes better and better and better after all those months. And so in the end, it has all those associations in its mind, so to say, that you can then start to ask questions that it will try to answer to. And so actually LLMs are much more like your brain from a software perspective than traditional databases are. So LLMs do not store hard facts like a database. There is not one single record that you can find, that you can look up, and which tells you, like, this is a fact, and it's been here since 2nd of January, for example. It's not how it works, and your brains also do not really work like this. For example, if you would ask me, like, tell me, well, how was your trip to Paris last year? You will actually start to wonder, like, what was it again? Did I went with? What was the weather like? And depending on when you ask me, and depending on what I just read in the newspaper and so on, I may be telling a slightly different story, because I'm kind of reconstructing my Paris trip to answer your question. And that's also kind of how all those LLMs work. They reconstruct facts that they do not have stored as such in their brain. They try to reconstruct this. That's what they really do. Maybe also good to know, they do not remember what they said to you a minute ago. And so not even ChatGPT, which gives you the impression of actually chatting with you, actually remembers what you are telling it, because it stopped training in September 2021, and it can still take instructions from you today in 2023, but it will not remember what you were actually telling it a minute ago. So it really has to reread the entire set of prompts and its own answers every time you ask it to do something. And so it has a really limited working memory, so to say. So how do you apply LLMs to legal drafting? Let's give the floor to Senne again. And
yes. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you,
thank you.
Maarten. So let me just take over the presentation again. So yeah, what I want to do in this next segment is to focus on how we can use GPT-4 in the context of legal drafting and the particular challenges that lawyers face there. We've already established that LLMs are really good at language generation, manipulation. Maarten just explained that very clearly. And quite frankly, I don't think you would be here today if you hadn't already experienced that yourself. So instead, let's take a look at some weaknesses and see how we can apply LLMs to the legal drafting process in a way that makes the most of their strengths and kind of hides their weaknesses a little bit. So first of all, let's address an important paradox. AI is both intelligent and stupid at the same time. We can ask it to perform a little thought experiment to show that. If you're anything like me, not having to do math probably factored into your decision to go to law school. Still, it's useful to take this example to show how GPT-4's logical reasoning is put to the test. Here you can see that we're asking GPT-4 a fairly logical question. I put out 5 clothes to dry. They took 5 hours to dry. How much time does it take to dry 30? Now, what follows is a pretty convoluted calculation that ultimately arrives at an obviously wrong answer. One shirt doesn't wait for the other to be dry before it starts drying. Clothes can dry in parallel. But this is already a good example of kind of where that sort of logical reasoning, separate from the language generation itself, starts to break down a little bit. Another important point to emphasize is that LLMs are still very much error prone. Again, language generation, very good. The logical, factual stuff, not as much. So like Maarten explained earlier, all GPT-4 does is kind of play guessing games with itself a little bit. It doesn't understand on a fundamental level what it is producing, which can lead to errors that may seem obvious to us or from our point of view. So let's run the experiment here, right? So on the right-hand side, I've asked GPT-4 with the help of ClauseBuddy's GPT-4 integration to draft a dispute resolution clause under Belgian law. So let's see how it performs. So first of all, it starts out pretty well. It provides a sort of cooling off period in the first paragraph before proceeding with litigation. That's something that you do tend to see in practice, where before parties can move on to claims and proceedings and litigation and stuff like that, they do need to negotiate a little bit beforehand, and then it moves on to the important stuff: governing law, competent court, staples of a good dispute resolution clause, and it actually nails both of these. It says that the governing law is Belgium. It identifies the competent court as Brussels. With no further input from my end on the competent court, it just chose to it chose the capital of the country as the competent court, which is a reasonable assumption to make. You could argue that it slips up a little bit because it's drafting a singular clause, but then within that clause, it's referring to a clause 1 and a clause 2. But to be honest, that's a little bit nitpicky because it could also just refer to paragraph 1, paragraph 2. That's not really like the major issue here. On the third element, it does slip up for the first time. English will not be the language of choice for the actual proceedings themselves, because that isn't allowed under Belgian law, except for a few very specific circumstances like maritime law and things like that. For the fourth paragraph, another paragraph that you could reasonably argue should be included here. But then finally, in the fifth paragraph, it does something weird where it includes an entire agreement clause. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with entire agreement clauses, these basically limit the agreement that the parties make to whatever is in the contract, to avoid things like subsequent emails or parallel emails from during the drafting process, to kind of create ambiguity rather on what exactly it is that the parties are agreeing to. But that doesn't make sense to include an entire agreement clause for a single clause. It only makes sense in the context of an entire agreement. But again, it doesn't understand that on a fundamental level like a lawyer does. And that creates another interesting paradox. LLMs make these errors that seem obvious to us, and so it's easy to ridicule them a little bit, or to say that they are incompetent or unusable. Is that true? Of course not. LLMs can draft flawless contracts, but neither can the average lawyer, as you can see here on the left-hand side. Again, the point in highlighting these paradoxes is not to dismiss them as being useless, but to emphasize the necessity of being aware of LLM's shortcomings, and so that we can focus on applying them to their strengths. So let's take a look at a few use cases of legal drafting where we lean more or less heavily into GPT's strong suits. One of the things that I hated most when I was still a lawyer was preparing pitch decks and proposals. You know them, those kinds of documents where you make every lawyer on the team seem like a superhero moonlighting as a lawyer. If we're being completely honest, the main skill in producing these kinds of documents is taking a generic description of a lawyer like this, like the one you can see on the screen, and turning it into something 3 times that size with a bunch of superlatives added in. And this is what sorry, I wasn't sharing the appropriate description, so you can see it here. Generic description of the lawyer. This is basically what GPT does really well. You're not applying a lot of logical reasoning here. You're pretty much holding its hand and allowing it to do what it does best. Again, language manipulation. In the same vein, GPT-4 is really great at drafting. Just a second. At drafting emails that don't carry too much legal technicality. Here, we're already giving GPT-4 a little bit more freedom to do what it wants, but the results are great. It may not find our specific tone of voice straight away, but with that limited sort of input that we're providing it, that is to be expected. And also we can tweak where necessary. We're not, this isn't the final product necessarily by any means. Here's another example of something that the GPT-4 does really well. This is something we're calling FlexiClause. Basically, what you're seeing here is a dynamic clause generator. In this specific example, it's generating a definition for the term trademark. The parameters are all defined upfront by a human, by an experienced lawyer. Filling in those parameters is then left up to the AI. Think of it as giving the ingredients to a recipe to GPT-4 and then just letting it cook. And this is honestly just one of the little dozen or so little experiments that we're running with GPT-4 at all times. FlexiClause is a working title. It's probably something that we won't even be releasing to the public. But if you'd like to know more, maybe give it a spin. Don't hesitate to reach out after the presentation. And then one GPT-4 powered feature that we have released is our new hybrid drafting feature, which allows you to draft an ad hoc contract with a simple prompt. I'll jump into a live demo now, which can either work out great for me or not. That's the thing with LLMs, right? The output is always going to be random every time. But let me just reshare my screen here, and then we can jump into this demo. So basically, what I can do here in my ClauseBuddy menu is to ask for a distribution agreement under Belgian law or something along those lines. I can then indicate the language that I would like the document to be drafted in. I can indicate how long or how short I would like to make it, and I can also say give a few indications on some miscellaneous options, like for example how concise or how comprehensive the drafting style of the sections of the clauses should be. When I click draft here, I'm not going to receive like a full document straight away, because we do realize that there is more to distribution agreements than just letting GPT produce something for you. No, what's going to happen first is GPT is going to produce an outline for us, a skeleton, if you will, kind of the table of contents. And it's going to allow us, as soon as it's finished creating this outline, the skeleton, it's going to allow us to enter into a conversation with it to kind of see, okay, what sort of specific clauses do we need? What sort of fine tuning or tweaking do we need to do to the suggested outline that has been given here? And it will allow us to, one, use GPT to suggest additional clauses, but it will also, two, allow us to leverage our own human curated, vetted content, our own standardized clauses, if indeed we have them, because for those of you who may not be aware, ClauseBuddy is first and foremost a tool that allows you to create this sort of shared brain of standardized legal drafting knowledge with your team. So let's take a look here, right? Again, this is all random. So let's see here. We've got supplier obligations for product supply and delivery. So what I can do here is I can first of all ask GPT to auto draft a clause for me. I can provide some additional instructions if I so choose, and that'll provide a little bit of legal nuance, of course, in the first result. But what happens here is that GPT will draft a clause with whatever additional instructions that it receives, and we can then either say, okay, you know what, this is already approaching what we need, or maybe we can fine tune it a little bit. So we could include like a new paragraph or something along those lines. We could tweak the material that already has been produced. But we can even engage in a further conversation where we ask GPT to either make this longer or shorter, to rephrase a little bit. We can even ask it to suggest additional nuances that it might not have included the first time around, but that could still be relevant for this type of clause. So like, something like late delivery penalties or something along those lines. Again, once you provide that additional instruction, whether you type it out yourself or you auto-generate it with the help of GPT, it's going to then reconstruct the clause. You're going to, at any point in time, be able to see, okay, what exactly was changed here? And either that's going to be like a new paragraph, or in this case, as you can see right here, it's going to be like a new sentence within a specific paragraph. And then you can still fine tune, tweak as much as you like. You can also, like I said earlier, leverage content that you already have that is already vetted by a lawyer. So we could say here, like, okay, I'm searching for a termination for cause clause. And then you can see here with this vetted, curated library, there are typically additional filters that you can apply there. So again, because of that curation, because of that vetting, your team members or yourself, you may have already identified certain tags. So we could say, you know what, I need a mutually favorable termination clause, and then we just insert that here, and we can still subject it to this additional tweaking process. We can still again ask the AI to engage or to make the necessary adjustments if necessary. But yeah, we do have that freedom to both use AI generated content and our own content. So trying to kind of leverage the best of man and machine there. And then when you're done, you can also choose in which type of style you would like to export this document. So it's perfectly possible to upload a house style to ClauseBuddy and basically have every document that you produce in this way to automatically follow your house style. So that covers that for hybrid drafting. Let me move into our presentation again. So we're going to go back to our slides, specifically to our slides on, just a second, on applying LLMs in legal drafting. And there we go. So now we arrive at the trickier bits. As soon as you start requesting the technical application of legal principles, you tend to run into some major issues. First of all, GPT is outdated by default. As Maarten already shared, the cutoff date for its knowledge is September 2021. It doesn't have any knowledge on events that happened afterwards. Secondly, it was never trained to be able to distinguish between jurisdictions. And so especially if you're like looking for stuff in Dutch, it sometimes has difficulty distinguishing between Dutch jurisdiction, so the Netherlands, and Belgian jurisdiction, so Flanders, for example, where we also speak Dutch. It doesn't really understand that nuance all too well. But perhaps the most dangerous limitation is hallucination, or the fact that it can occasionally produce output that sounds confident, but is completely made up. And that's the real danger. It sounds so confident, so it's very easy to assume that it's pulling this from somewhere that is factually correct. In the example to the right, by the way, the answer is incorrect. People with a little bit of a background in Belgian employment law will know that the multiplication factor is not, in fact, 12, but it is 13.92. Just a little factoid for you there. Naturally, these hallucinations are difficult to avoid due to the way that these tools are set up. I mean, sure, we provide analytics and insight now, as you can see from this conversation that we captured with GPT-4 in step 7. It explains that we do analytics and insights. We didn't do that in September of 2021. We do that now that is the cutoff date for GPT's knowledge. And finally, there are many different situations where predictability is key, and where, again, relying on GPT will not get you ideal kinds of ideal output. Imagine you are an in-house legal counsel, right? And you're drafting master services agreements on a daily basis to conclude with your organization's clients. In this situation, you will probably have base material like a template. You will have standardized clauses. You will have company standard clauses and fallback clauses. You will maybe even have a playbook that kind of defines or sets out acceptable and unacceptable positions, so that everyone in the team plays along following the same rules, is on the same wavelength, so to speak. Now, in these types of workflows, you want consistency in the documents that you conclude, in the documents that you produce, but GPT or LLMs in general cannot give that to you. Here's a good example of that, by the way. We instruct GPT-4, again using ClauseBuddy's GPT-4 integration, to draft the same clause 6 times in a row, each time with a maximum of about 110 words. And you can see here very clearly that the results are always variable. And now this is just for like a very straightforward singular clause. Imagine how variable a 20-page contract will be. So with that all out of the way, Maarten, the floor is yours again. Maarten, you're on mute.
Yeah, the typical error that everybody makes. I should have AI to warn me for this. So the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. It says, remember, that we assess the result of something like GPT-4 to be 8 out of 10 in quality. Not perfect, but let's be honest, neither are lawyers. Nobody is perfect. And then think about the fact that LLMs produce things 100 times as fast as you can. But of course, as a sector, we are risk averse. We are a conservative sector, so you can assume that there will be a lot of focus on what doesn't work in our sector. You can expect several national bar associations to start objecting against this kind of technology. You can expect that there will be embarrassing errors made by prestigious law firms who will already jump on the LLM train. You can expect a period of disillusionment, as you probably heard, for every technology in the hype cycle. And you should give it some time in every organization. Change management is hard. IT departments do need time to adapt, but the clock is ticking for everyone in the legal sector. And we guess, together with some other experts, that you probably have 2 years' time before things are really starting to take off with this new technology. So the baseline will actually move. Because if you think about all the elements that I just explained, that's for the internal view within our legal sector. But now also think about the external view. What will your clients or your internal business customers think of it? Suddenly, you will be confronted with trade-offs between having drafting a document that is not perfect, but in a lot of cases will be good enough. And clients without a legal background will probably not be able to tell the difference anyway. So then the question is actually not so much like what can GPT-4 do for me as a lawyer, but actually what can GPT-4 do for your clients? And okay, probably you're thinking right now, this will not happen to me. But note the following. Everybody is really good at seeing opportunities for automation in other sectors. Think about your own reaction if you would be stuck in an old-fashioned doctor's office. You would probably think like, why isn't this automated? Or why is the software so bad and so on? And then imagine what your own clients or your own internal customers think about your technology and how it's always been difficult to argue, for example, why legal drafting is actually really hard. And maybe you will agree that a new technology like these LLMs will level the playing field between you and your client or your business customer. And suddenly the starting position that your client, your business customer has is not so much worse than what you currently have in your legal team. You will have the same fancy engine, GPT-4. Yes, that's something that you will share with your client or your business customer. And yes, you will have some other additional content, probably not very organized at this moment. That's still something that you have that GPT-4 maybe doesn't have, and that your client probably doesn't have. And yes, there's some practice, some experience in the minds of your colleagues, of yourself, that you can still leverage. But at the end of the day, the baseline will have moved. Instead of you being on with a bike and your client being on foot, that's what's still the case today. Suddenly everyone will have this fancy race car to draft documents with, and you will have some slight advantage still, but the baseline will actually really move. Which brings us to the distinction between creation and production. As you can, this is not something that we invented. This has actually been described by a legal visionary, Bosman, who warned about this divide between creation and production. So what's the distinction? Clients will actually like to pay for the creation stuff. That's something, strategy, for example, out of the box thinking, the kind of work that typically is done at the partner or the senior associate level. That's something they will continue to pay for, and that is very difficult to replace, to get replaced by GPT-4. Completely different analysis for production work. That's basically everything else besides the creation work. And everything that needs to happen to, produce your memo, to give advice and so on, but it is probably not worth 600 euros or $1,000 per hour. And so this creation between, this distinction between creation and production will really get very sharp with the introduction of GPT-4. Of course, the death of the billable hour has been predicted many times, and it has never happened up to now. But right now, we're facing a new technology that's actually really good with language. Law is a profession of words. So there's a good chance that everything will actually change tomorrow. So charging for production work will become more and more difficult because it can be so well automated in the near future with GPT-4. Speed, besides cost, there's speed. Clients and business customers will even want their results faster than they want it today. Remember, you're competing with a tool that they also have in their hands tomorrow, and that allows them to make it to make a memo or a contract themselves in a few minutes' time. That, from their perspective, may be good enough in a lot of cases. Then there's the thing about the templates that you will need to have readily available. I used to work for a partner at a law firm where, after meeting with a client, he came into the room where the juniors sat together, and then he explained like, yeah, this needs to be drafted. And then he really honestly assumed that we in the office had some documents lying around, some good templates that were actually 85% reusable for his particular scenario for his client. In talking to the, I always assumed that, this was just happened to be the partner that I used to work for, one of his peculiarities. But in talking to associates in the last couple of years, we actually noticed here at ClauseBase that many partners are actually like this. They simply forgot how difficult it is to create good templates. So in reality, most legal teams do not have good templates at this moment. But these templates, okay, you can get away with the lack of templates still today, but tomorrow that's a different story, because templates will be one of your essential tools that still give you a head start compared to GPT-4 in the hands of your client. And so because it's one of those essential tools, you really need to have it, and its importance will really, really rise in the near future. And of course, there's the thing of the cost. Forget about charging for templates. In a few years' time, this will no longer be possible. And so perhaps even a lot of the production work will be really difficult to charge, and only the creation work will be happily paid by your clients or business customers. Here's a funny question. Where will the industry actually go? We asked this question to some lawyers, and we got some very different answers. Will clients actually clients actually accept to pay a lot of money per hour for a contract that is drafted by a large language model? Probably not. But on the other hand, will clients still accept to pay 600 euros if you or a law firm who charges by the hour, and you don't use a lot of technology? So which is it, and what will clients actually be doing in the near future? What will they expect you to do as a lawyer, or as kind of similar story if you are an in-house legal counsel? So things can be expected to change, and the view on these matters could very well be different tomorrow than it is today. Should I be concerned as a lawyer? You may be asking yourself. Yeah, even more than with traditional legal technology, some category of lawyers should indeed start to rethink their position. Let's face it, there are a lot of lawyers for whom the bread and butter is production work, not overly complicated stuff always. For a significant percentage of what they do, it could perhaps be automated in the near future. As long as there were no real disruptors in the legal industry, again, because language processing is really hard. This wasn't really a big thing in the past, but right now it could change. With the disruptor that everybody will have in his own hands tomorrow, your clients will think differently about all of this. And so now is really the moment to be able to provide additional elements to your service delivery. So you will, instead of just drafting something, you will have to come up with strategy, advice, commercial awareness, all the kind of things that GPT could not be trained on, that wasn't publicly discussed online millions of times, so that it could learn from it. And that's where you still have the edge as a lawyer, hopefully. Impact on staffing. There will be a lot of impact. What we think is that the prediction that your employees, your fellow lawyers will ask for legal technology will really rise. There have been surveys, many of them, that where you clearly see that lawyers, particularly the young generation of lawyers, is asking for more technology. It hasn't really happened up to now, but there's now something there that people will actually be using both in their private time, say, for example, to draft the content of a birthday card, or to organize their supermarket lists and so on. And that very same tool, GPT-4, GPT-5, whatever, will also be usable within the office. So suddenly there is a tool, that will really be will really be used by a lot of people, that they will get experience with, and will be also want to be using this for their drafting of legal memos, contracts, and so on. Which brings us actually to the consumerization of legal work. That's a big term, but it kind of means that the way that we deal with technology as consumers will will drip into the way that we actually work. And the very good example of this trend was with the Blackberries and the iPhones. You know, if you still remember the Blackberries, they were the only devices, the mobile devices allowed by law firms at one point in time, but employees would sneakily introduce those new tools into the office, even when it wasn't allowed by the company policy. And then over time, the disadvantages of the BlackBerry were becoming so painful that the new iPhones and Android phones and so on had to be introduced. And so that's the consumerization of legal work, where all these shiny tools that maybe you don't even allow tomorrow will get into the office over time. So probably that will also happen with the large language models. We know that some law firms have immediately banned GPT or have blacklisted it, for example, on their firewalls. While some other law firms have publicly embraced it. Another example of where we see this consumerization really at work is the law students. You know, we had a working group with last year law students a few weeks ago, and they acknowledged, you know, everybody is writing his thesis with GPT at this moment. You know, look around in the library, and apparently every student is using this new technology. They are exchanging tips on hints of how to avoid being caught for plagiarism, but they are all using the new tool. Do you really expect that when they arrive in law firms next year that they will suddenly drop that new tool? This will not happen, of course. So that's kind of the consumerization of legal work that we can expect with such a new technology. Then there's the thing about the training, like think about those students that I mentioned. Will they actually know how to draft memos? Or even worse, they've probably not had a lot of training on contract drafting. I had a very hard training on this, you know, years of back and forth with a partner, you know, with redlining and so on. But how will this happen with the new generation? Where will they acquire their skills? And so that's kind of a question that a lot of legal departments will now have to answer. How do you deal with this? And where will the new lawyers learn how to still draft and assess all the legal material? Big question, but it will have an impact. And then the not so nice impact, of course, probably less staffing. This is very unpredictable. You see that there's arguments for and against. This is highly unpredictable because it's also often said that new technology cuts jobs, but usually creates more jobs in return. I mean, what will be the case here with GPT? Nobody knows. We do know that already some partners of the law firms we work with have quietly acknowledged, like, yeah, I will not fire people, for example, but I will at the same time not hire the new staff that I have been thinking about, because, you know, these are busy times, but for the next months, they will not hire new people because they are much more interested in applying GPT to this. So if this trend continues, you know what could happen. Impact on legal technology as a sector. You will be expecting a lot of new tools that appear on the market in the next months. Most of those will be the kind of very easily built tools, built in a few weeks' time, probably one-trick ponies that will appear on the market and will try to seduce you with the shiny new things that they can do, all built around GPT-4. And there will be some creative ideas, some not so creative ideas, but that's what you can expect that will happen on the market. Be very aware of this also outside of the legal sector, because there will be a lot of hype around all of this. What would our recommendations be to conclude? A very practical one. There's a waiting list for GPT-4, both at OpenAI, you know, the developer behind GPT, and Microsoft, who has kind of an identical version, but with some more privacy guarantees. Get on the waiting list as soon as possible. Ask your IT team to fill in this form, and you will want to have this as soon as possible in your hands, even if you will not actually be using it for real work. Then you will really want to have an open conversation with staff about the usage, the dangers of large language models, because, you know, don't go for the BlackBerry approach where you ban it, but it will still sneakily enter the workspace, because that's an accident waiting to happen. Be open about this. Everybody knows that these tools exist as consumers. Think about the training. That's still an open question of how you have to deal with this, but you will want to have an internal discussion about this. And if you haven't already been trying to do this, hire some people who are really good at this new territory. There are not a lot of them who are really good at this, so maybe you want to hire a good consultant, but you'll need it. You'll definitely need these kinds of people in the near future to start working on your knowledge management. And by the way, also hire a project manager. We as lawyers are really bad at project management, but you will want to need one, because you'll have to organize your knowledge management better today than tomorrow. Don't become, you know, the next taxi sector that is eaten by Uber and is protesting against it, because this will be a futile fight that you can't win. Act now. We say this from experience. All habits die really hard. Change management is difficult, particularly at law firms. We as lawyers, we have really deeply ingrained habits that are difficult to unlearn, and this takes time. Convincing the non-believers, there will always be non-believers in your firm, and they may be silent, they may be explicit, but you will encounter them, that's for sure. Workflows take a lot of time to change. Be aware of this. Don't think that if you introduce GPT-4 tomorrow, that the day after tomorrow, everybody will be happily using it. That's just not how it works. There is also the people and the processes that you need to change. And right now, we know this as a fact that knowledge management in legal teams is really bad. And probably we still encounter the good ones among our customers. So in general, knowledge management has been really bad in legal teams, and we need to do something about this. And what can you actually do? To conclude, yeah, everybody's been asking about this. How can I add my own knowledge to GPT-4? If it's really bad at facts, if it doesn't know about my local legislation, how do I deal with this? We've written an article about this. It was very trending a few weeks ago, because apparently everybody wants to know how this works. I won't enter into the details. You can read about all of this, but there are actually essentially 4 approaches that you can take towards this. You can give facts, knowledge to GPT, simply pasting it into your prompt, you know, together with your question. That's the best way, but it has a big drawback, and that's that the space is limited within your prompt. Then some think naively like, yes, we can perhaps create our own legal LLM. Why not? Forget it. I won't even enter into the details. Way too difficult. You'll need millions of euros to do this, or you'll need law firms to batch together to pool your knowledge. Will not happen. Forget it. Fine-tuning, that's all the rage that you read on the internet. Basically, that's adding a layer of your own knowledge on top of an existing LLM. Could work, but in practice, the results have been not so satisfying so far. So the best approach at this moment seems to be to use to organize your content into a good database, filter it, do a kind of pre-filtering, and then submit limited parts of text to the prompt of GPT-4. And it's not a perfect solution, but it kind of works. So it's probably your best bet at this moment and for the foreseeable future. But it does require you to start organizing. And that's actually not bad, because, you know, the tools at this moment, the tools are in flux. The tools are not perfect. GPT is not perfect. There are variations of, you know, other LLMs that are appearing on the market. Probably GPT is here to stay, but maybe a better one appears tomorrow. But actually the tools around them are really in flux, and there are new ones being developed, all little tools to get your knowledge in there. Nobody knows what this will be like in 6 months' time, so it's probably too early to already jump into the really technical stuff at this moment, and especially not because, you know, there is this open source, you know, free technology that everybody's jointly collaborating on that could very well be the better option in the future. Who knows? Google, at least, you know, according to a leaked memo, they believe that the open source models will actually become a really big thing in the future. So what can you do as a law firm? So at this moment, you know, while all the technology is still in flux, start cleaning. You know, it's maybe a paradox, but even with the greatest large language models, they are very sensitive to garbage in, garbage out. And don't even think that your current document management store is a good source for to feed into your LLM. Forget this. It contains outdated information. It's not a good way to approach this. You'll have to do your homework. There is no way around this. You'll have to start organizing your content. Throw away the bad stuff, the outdated stuff, label things, give hints to the future LLM on how it should interpret all these things so that it can actually create your automated memo in the future, in 6 months or 2 years time. Who knows when the technology will finally be ready to do this. But start organizing today, because probably the technology will be ready before you are finished organizing your content. By the way, I'm giving you a few hints here. So forget about your document management system. That's not the right approach. But Microsoft has a few good tools that you probably already have access to free of charge. There is also a feature within Microsoft Word that you can use to extract knowledge from existing documents. So you don't always have to use specialized tools like the ones that we offer and competitors of ours offer. But it's a possibility. So, but at least do something so that you are prepared for tomorrow. And so, yeah, that's kind of the presentation that we wanted to give. I'll now give the floor back to Senne, maybe.
Yes. Thank you, Maarten. We did indeed receive one question. This pertains to something that you touched upon, so I'm just going to read it out to you, and you can take this one. If two law firms on opposite sides use AI to create a contract, the contracts that they produce may end up having similar wording and structure because of the way AI is programmed. Right now, we would be relying on lawyers, but eventually AI may be able to create basic contracts. For AI to think that it needs to draft clauses that favors its client, that will require legal reasoning. Do you envision ClauseBase to add a customization that sets your contracts apart? I presume it would largely depend on the data set that you train your AI with, but what else might you need is the question.
Yeah, that's indeed the where we would like to go, where, you know, you will label your content. You will say, like, this is my content, and this is where the position is favorable if we are acting for this side or for the other side, where you will kind of give all these hints, and not a few of them, but hundreds, if not thousands of them, to the future large language model, so that it can learn your preferences and so that it can actually know, like, what you would like your position to be. So it's a bit early to tell, but that's most likely something that will be possible in the future. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. I've also received a personal message by someone who is asking, you also do document automation. Do you feel that this is being replaced by AI, or that it can be replaced? For me personally, so this is something that I also touched on. Again, this draws back to the question of predictability, which is something that LLMs currently do not have. Every prompt that you insert every time provides a different output. So document automation that relies on standardization, or basically any type of legal drafting workflow that requires output to be standardized, like, you know, documents that are drafted in high volume, where you have standardized clauses and things like that. I don't think that is going to disappear anytime soon. And as a matter of fact, we're seeing here at ClauseBase also that with the influx of GPT-4 news, there's actually this sort of renewed interest in document automation because it is undoubtedly human in a sense, right? It's very clearly vetted, curated, produced by a human being. So no, I don't think that this is going to be replaced immediately, except of course for those workflows where maybe that predictability element plays less of a role. Maarten, maybe another question for you. Someone is asking, how is the confidentiality handled when using AI? In particular, if the AI has access to internal documentation, how can one guarantee the confidentiality?
Yeah, we kind of expected this question, but we didn't touch upon this. There's a bit of a fear, uncertainty, and doubt at this moment. OpenAI, you know, the startup mentality, they have kind of burned themselves. Like they actually indeed use your prompts, everything that you submit there. They reuse it to train GPT-5 in the future, or GPT-6 or whatever. So that is of course a big problem. Now, since March 2023, they actually reconsidered their position, and they are saying right now, like, we will not be doing this with the professional use that you make through the programmatic gates, the API as they call it. So as a consumer, they still reuse your content, but not if you, for example, like we here at ClauseBase, we could use their API. We don't, we use Microsoft's, but it's kind of the same. And if you enter through that development gateway, that API, don't worry about it. So that's a possibility that you actually that you use it only as an API, and so not the consumer version. Still, the reputation of OpenAI is burned. They're burned. They have something very bad in this regard in their reputation. So maybe the better option is the one that we took, that we simply go for the Microsoft version. And Microsoft essentially gives you the same confidentiality guarantees as you get when you use their Office 365 and store there something. So not a big issue in the end, or you could perhaps look into the other options that are available in the market. They will probably also be aware of all the confidentiality issues and do something about this if they haven't already done so.
Okay, great. Maarten, I have another question. Maybe you can touch upon this as well. What's your best guess for the future commercial, including charging, model that will be adopted by the LLM vendors in the medium and long term?
They will probably continue what they are doing right now, but make it a lot cheaper. So it's not very expensive at this moment if you just do drafting. It is very expensive if you do contract analysis. So if you feed it thousands of pages, it does get really expensive. But as a law firm, don't worry about the costs that it triggers for generating a few pages of a contract. Not a big problem. The costs will probably go down significantly when the technology matures, becomes better, requires less resources, and so on. And because of the competition between themselves and with this open source technology that you can run on your own servers in hopefully the very near future.
Yeah, and actually in a related question also, how does the credit model in ClauseBuddy work for AI? Is it per question? What if you make a clause multiple times because you are not satisfied?
Yeah, we kind of use we give you the option of using your own gate. So if you have a contract with Microsoft, which is again barring the waiting list, not difficult to get, you can actually ask us to send all of your queries through your own gateway at Microsoft. So then we don't charge you anything. It's just Microsoft that charges you directly. If you don't have this possibility to go directly through your own Microsoft account, then we have a kind of common account that is slightly more expensive than what Microsoft charges you. And we do give you a few euros or dollars of free of charge credits that you can use for drafting clauses. And typically in a regular subscription, you shouldn't be paid subscription. You shouldn't worry about this too much. If you draft a contract after contract, you will run into the limits. But for your occasional use right now, especially during experimenting, you'll not hit the limits with your paid accounts.
Yeah, and I think I have so far the final question here. What about the cultural aspect. So a clause in a confusion culture country is expected to be worded differently than those in Anglo-Saxon countries. And indeed, the output that GPT produces is, of course, directly correlated to the training material that it was that it was built with in the first place. And what we indeed see there is that there's not a lot of sensibility for civil law drafting versus common law drafting. There's obviously a very different kind of culture, a different kind of approach in those two styles of drafting. Common law drafting is much more explicit, exhaustive, leaves no room for detail, whereas civil law drafting typically is augmented by like a very expansive civil code. In countries like Belgium and France, for example, that is something that basically underlies contracts in many different ways, so that lawyers in many different cases do not feel compelled to write a specific article on a specific clause rather on a specific topic in civil law contracts, just because they know that it is already being taken care of by the civil code. And indeed, there, as is probably to be expected, GPT does lean a lot more towards common law drafting. So indeed, there's kind of like a little bit of a loss in civil law drafting, or a loss in that style, I think, if indeed more and more drafting starts to occur in that GPT-4 style. Although I will say, maybe Maarten, you can comment on that based on your experience, but I will say that in my experience, I kind of already see, just completely separated from GPT-4, I already see that evolution. I see that there's a lot more evolution towards the common law drafting style. Actually, one of the a major CEO here in a Belgian chemicals company recently stated so he started his career as one of the in-house lawyers. Over the course of entire career, stayed with the same company, worked his way up to CEO. He actually stated that when he was a lawyer, just starting out his career in the 19 etc. He regularly saw contracts that were 2 to 3 pages in length. That was like the average length of a contract. When he retired, that was around 20 to 30 pages. And I do think that has some relationship to like the common lawization of contract drafting in general. But yeah, that's only going to be more pronounced with GPT-4 and other LLM technology. Okay, I do think that covers all of the questions. So I want to thank you all for taking the time today, for being with us. Like I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we will be sharing both the slides and the recording with you. And then, of course, if there are any other questions in the future, you can feel free to reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn. You also will have our email addresses. So yeah, happy to provide any further information you're interested in.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye.